After a history of conflict and failed talks, Kosovo and Serbia seem to have taken a step towards peace. Donald Trump takes the credit, but has he really brokered a breakthrough? And does the Cold War with China have anything to do with it? I'm Ali Aslan, and today on The Newsmakers, we look at the battle for influence in the Balkans. The EU tried and failed to negotiate peace between Kosovo and Serbia. Now the US has stepped in and claims to have succeeded.
This is a truly historic day, a very, very important day, especially in a beautiful part of the world. I'm pleased to announce a truly historic commitment. Serbia and Kosovo have each committed to economic normalization. Very important term. They've been working on this for many years, decades, actually.
Donald Trump celebrating what he thinks is a historic moment there, but not everyone's convinced this deal is the catalyst for peace. Nevertheless, the US president appears to be gaining some influence in the Balkans, though he's not the only one trying. China, Russia, and the EU are all vying for a more active role in the region. And it looks like Xi Jinping is making the most headway. Huge investments like this one have brought Beijing and Belgrade closer together. So, is the EU being left behind? And if so, what can it do to combat China's growing influence? To discuss this, I'm joined now from Belgrade by Darko Trifunovic. He's a former First Secretary of the Foreign Service of Bosnia and Herzegovina at the UN. In Beijing is Victor Gao. He's the Vice President of the Center for China and Globalization. And in Vienna is political analyst and Balkan expert Klaus Jurgens. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Darko, Donald Trump speaks of a historic deal, a historic day, a peace brokered between Serbia and Kosovo. Would you concur? Would you agree with him?
Yes, why not? Simply, United States have great influence to Albanian population in Kosovo, and it was only one way to bring Albanian side to negotiate. I think it's time for the peace, and this is a good sign for that. Economy is a good ground, and finally, we shall be all part of the same family.
Interestingly enough, Darko, the US has been somewhat absent from the Balkans for quite some time. Now it is making a comeback, if you will, with this historic peace deal that normalizes economic ties between Serbia and Kosovo. Was it just not apparent to us that the US was still very much involved in Balkan affairs? Or how do you explain this, what is internationally perceived to be this sudden initiative on the part of the White House?
It's too complex question, but you have to understand that United States have great conflict with Germany regarding South Stream, and there is a 7th fleet of United States on the door of the Chinese Sea. So the situation is geopolitically very interesting, and I think Balkan is a good platform for the U.S. foreign policy to come back and to confront, of course, Germany, which is Germany is one of the leading countries of European Union. But exactly the Germany is destroying the European Union inside. Now we have another players like Russia. We have, of course, your country, Turkey, as well, and China that are knocking on the door. So it will be very interesting to see the competition of the global and regional superpower in the Balkan again.
Klaus, how do you evaluate this deal brokered by the White House?
Well, I think it is a huge step forward. With all hesitation, huge step. I double-checked on the comments made shortly before now after the weekend, saying it is the economy which for the next 12 months hopefully should take center stage, bring the two sides closer together. The frozen normality, as many people call it, the status quo, should be basically sidelined. People should take a look forward. There will be direct flights for the first time, if I'm not wrong, for the first time in 20 or 21 years. Now, I mentioned this before with all hesitation. What about agreeing on a free trade agreement, which goes even one step further than what was agreed in Washington, to see how the two sides can really come together, job creation, employment, prosperity, and that this might lead the way to and for a political solution. I think this time, sorry, Brussels, whatever happens today in Brussels with the next round of talks, I think credit to Washington.
And Washington, certainly, and Donald Trump in particular, is coming out pretty good in this particular deal. But you said that the economy is a driving force in this deal. And when it comes to the economy in the Balkans, Victor, your country, China, is never far away. Quite on the contrary, China has been having a huge influence in the Balkans, growing influence as far as economy is concerned. Many people have been wondering why Beijing has selected or is vying Balkans as a region to leave its economic but also political footprint.
Thank you very much. From the Chinese perspective, the Balkans is a very important part in Europe. And also, when we talk about major connectivity from East Asia all the way to West Europe, Balkan is very much in the middle of that. And improved connectivity through Balkans, north-south and east-west, will really complement to the greater connectivity between East Asia to West Europe. So in this sense, I think any easement of tension and improvement of relations involving Balkan countries are to be welcomed, whether it is brokered by EU or, in this case, by the United States. Stylistically, I find it troubling that the president of the United States doesn't seem to deal with the president of Serbia or Kosovo like equal. I don't think he needs to sit in a bigger chair than the other two. And I think treating each head of state as an equal is an important thing in dealing with Balkan countries, big or small.
Beijing's influence certainly is growing. It's offering loans in the previous years to countries like Montenegro, Serbia, of course, Macedonia, and Bosnia. Darko, how is Beijing's involvement in the Balkans being perceived by those countries?
Well, there is a lot of criticism on China's side, but I firmly disagree with all, because we don't have any arguments, because with the Chinese investments, we don't have any political demand. For example, with Russia economy strategy in the Balkan, we have political demand from the Kremlin that all those countries ally of Russia has to be against European Union, has to not participate in NATO and not become member of the NATO. So with the Russian energy policy, there is a political demand. So far, we don't see from China any kind of the political demand. We just see growing of economy, and I think it's very welcome. But now, as you can see, part of the agreement between United States and Serbia plus Kosovo, it's also that Serbia will give up and prohibit 5G network. I think the Chinese operator Huawei did not do enough to promote this network and to explain, despite the open criticism in publicity, despite of open opposing 5G network in Serbia, they did not do anything from China's side to explain that why 5G is good and why 5G maybe is to give some kind of response. But I would like to draw your attention to a very important issue. Why this come now from United States and why Israel is involved? There is United States, Israel, Cyprus, and Greece pipe, because biggest finding of natural gas is in Mediterranean Sea, in triangle between Cyprus, Lebanon, and Israel, plus Syria. So this is another aspect of these things, why United States are pushing so much Kosovo, Serbia right now, Albania with the port of Drac, and the pipe that it will be built up to compete with the Russian energy policy and confronting, of course, South Stream 2. So behind this deal, it's definitely something bigger, and that's bigger is United States energy policy in the eastern flank of NATO.
Victor, Darko is saying we do welcome Chinese involvement in the Balkans because it comes with no political strings attached. But certainly Beijing is not doing this out of a sense of benignness. What's in it for your country?
Well, from the
in
Chinese
Serbia?
perspective, the greater connectivity there is, the greater for everyone involved, including for China. And China is doing this very much on commercial terms, but with any political conditions attached to these commercial deals, actually will backfire. It will backfire against China, it will backfire against the recipient countries. Therefore, I would say from the Chinese perspective, the more investment from China or any other country in the Balkan countries will be welcome because it will result in greater connectivity and the recipient countries will benefit. And the more development there is in Balkan countries, China will benefit because China is now the biggest trading nation in the world. So this gives China the reason why we want to be involved in Balkan, why we want to contribute to connectivity and infrastructure, and why we should not be involved in politics or ideology at all.
Well, it certainly is contributing to greater connectivity, Victor, but critics also say that it creates unsustainable high levels of debt and thus financial dependency, of course, on Beijing.
Well, I would say when you do any big infrastructure project, financing would include equity as well as debt. Debt in itself is not a problem. How do you structure debt? How do you balance debt with equity? And how do you deal with immediate concerns with longer term concern? That is the key. To bark at the debt itself is really barking at the wrong tree. I would say if you look around the world, there is no major connectivity or infrastructure project which does not involve significant amount of debt. In China, in any other country, in the United States, when the United States built up its railway network, it involved a lot of debt from Europe. So let's be honest and let's don't bark at the wrong tree. I think the key is many countries, including in almost all the Balkan countries, they need more investment. They need greater connectivity. That's the key. Let's focus on that point.
Well, Klaus, interestingly enough, we talked about the US involvement, we talked about China's involvement, but the EU is being sidelined here, isn't it? And a lot of people say the EU is only, there's only one to be blamed, and that's EU itself. It has halted EU negotiation talks with Montenegro, Macedonia, Serbia. So how do you think the European Union, how do you think the EU can reclaim, if you will, its influence in the region?
Well, I don't want to sound overly critical towards Brussels, but you may know my viewpoint that in a post-Brexit world, which is soon to happen, one way or the other, the European Union has to find its own future, has to stand again on its own feet, trying 24 hours, 7 to avoid a second exit, if that could ever happen. Now, they talk about what kind of political union, what kind of economic union we really want. And all of a sudden, COVID-19 strikes the world, which underlines that the economy, that financing of healthcare, support for poor people without access to it, international cooperation, solidarity have become totally newly defined. And I think, with all modesty, it was the EU itself starting infighting, closing borders here and there, start and go quarantines, not really knowing how to provide for all the medical treatment or the masks. And I think what Serbia, if I mention Serbia one more time for half a minute, please. I think Serbia wants to come back to a certain form of non-alignment. Non-alignment can be very dangerous unless you have the economic power. What do you do? How do you survive? But Serbia, perhaps looking east, west, north, south, not only trying to rely on the EU, who we all know stepped in almost overnight with 93 million euros support after they found out that China would step in providing medical gear and masks to Serbia, which the EU at that point couldn't. Now, as I've said, no unfair criticism. COVID, no one ever predicted. But the EU is looking for a new future or for its very own future. Why not have countries thinking about only the benefits of EU membership? Now, coming back to your question, this frightens the EU in turn if prospective member states start to question benefits of membership long before being admitted, the EU might need some thorough soul searching, to be honest. And I think Kosovo and Serbia coming together, it doesn't matter who now brokered the deal, honestly. It could have been the EU, it could have been Beijing. It started now or continued in Washington.
Right.
The outcome is the key, peace and prosperity.
Peace and prosperity is certainly something that everybody can rally behind. But Darko, there is realpolitics, of course, going on. And we talked about EU, the US and China. And when you talk about the Balkans, Russia, of course, due to its historical, cultural, and particularly religious ties in the Balkans, is never far away. That's a country that would argue against further integration, further European integration in and structures in the region. How do these countries balance these vying interests? The US is in it, China is in it, the EU certainly has a vested interest, and Russia. And most of these interests do not align. That seems quite a difficult diplomatic task for anyone.
First of all, you have to understand that Serbia is for the years hostage of the Russian malign influence here. 1 year and a half, before 1 year and a half, Serbian police dismantled on one local mountain here Russian terrorist camp for the kids, organized by Enot and Wagner Group. 1 year before, the Serbian army discovered the Russian lieutenant colonel in espionage affair. And 1 month ago, we have pro-Russian demonstration in front of our national parliament with no leaders, but extremely pro-Russian oriented. So it was a good signal for our leadership to understand in which position Russia sees Serbia as a hostage, and that Russia wants to actually trade with the Serbia, with influence over the Serbia, trading for their own interests, which is legitimate for Russia, but it is also legitimate that Serbia has its own foreign policy. And I want to say some few more words about this agreement. This is, I think, eve or morning, correct me if I am wrong, of the very needed Serbian-Albanian peace talks and final, let's say, settlement between two strong nations in the Balkan, Albanians and Serbs, perhaps Croats. We need to sit at one table and understand what is our present situation and where we see our nation in the future. Hopefully, we see our nation all as a member of a European family, but some kind of the voice coming from inside the EU, it's, let's say, very dangerous for us. For example, in one hand, we are receiving that Russia is very malign, that Russia have very negative influence, and that Russia is a threat. And in other hand, we have Germany opening Nord Stream 2. So we don't understand what is going on and which kind of the policy and which kind of the unity, one of the leading country of EU. It's not any criticism over Germany, just we need clarification of this kind of relation. If the Russia is a threat, why one leading country fundraising this threat? So as I said, no accusation, nothing against Germany, don't get me wrong, but we need to understand what is foreign policy. Same with the China. For example, now we have a lot of, let's say, pressure that we shall stop trade with China. But the country like US, they actually make China what is China today. You can see the huge US investments in China, and they trade for 20 years. China become super economical world power because of the trade with United States, not with Africa and some other countries not like the EU. The same it's with Germany. We have a bunch of German factories in China, like Volkswagen, Audi, and others. And now how we can be pressured to stop to trade with China, and all these are when in situation when all our partners are in deep trade with China. I think
Right.
I agree with my previous colleague. We cannot stop trade, and we shall open all our countries for the trade. Political influence is one thing, but the trade, we shall open the borders and allow the businessmen to give the final word.
Victor, the Chinese ambitions are certainly quite on display with the Belt and Road Initiative. The Balkans just being one region amongst many, Africa could be counted towards those as well. And it's interesting whenever this argument of Beijing's influence abroad comes up, something like Darko said, that it comes with no political strings attached. Do you think that the others, Russia, the EU, and the US, are making a mistake by attaching political demands to closer cooperation, economic cooperation?
Well, first of all, I think what the Balkan countries need is peace and stability and harmony with each other and harmony with the rest of the world. From the Chinese perspective, I don't think China has any ideology or political system or political order or a religion, faith, for example, to export. What China exports is really commodities, manufactured products, technologies, etc. And we import a lot of things. So we are very pure in terms of focusing on trade. And in order to do more trade, which would be mutually beneficial, you need to have connectivity. And to have greater connectivity, you need to build roads, airports, seaports, etc. Greater connectivity leads to greater trade. So in this sense, I think China is more focused on the substance of the exchange. We don't have any interest in politics or political system, for example. As for other countries, Russia or the United States, I hope they will focus on more trade and investment. And hopefully, from the Balkan countries' perspective, the more investment they get from any country, China, Russia, or EU or Japan, for example, the better it will be for these countries. So let's focus on peace and development and harmony rather than divert ourselves or the Balkan countries into the dead alleys of geopolitics or exporting political system or religions back and forth.
Klaus, you talked about the EU being, rightly talked about the EU being distracted by COVID, as are many other countries in the world right now, of course. But the argument is to be made that the EU should not have fumbled this, that the EU should not have given up its influence, should not have lost its influence in the Balkan region, because this is a pre-COVID issue, isn't it? At the end of the day, the EU is so immersed with its own problems and challenges that it can no longer afford, perhaps, to extend its authority beyond. So what do you make of it?
Well, cynics would say I don't want to play devil's advocate, but if I may, a 1%, not sarcastic, but very honestly made comment. We have to go back many, many years. The EU started as the club of six and ultimately enlarged, as we all know, to 12, to 15, and so on and so forth. And with the end of what was then the Soviet Empire and the big enlargement in 2004. Now, the EU had, of course, and I must say this very bluntly, not only the idea of helping people in need, but to extend its sphere of influence by saying what we would call ultimately the Copenhagen criteria. We define what a political system, a democracy, and later on a fully functioning market economy has to look like. If all is fine, we will allow those countries to join. Fair enough. If you join a club, you know what is up. You know the price. Now, the second wave of enlargement, which so far never really materialized, but definitely was in the drawers of Brussels administrators, was not necessarily the southeast-east enlargement, as we all know so sadly, but after the eastern, northeastern, the southern eastern, shortly stopping short of before Turkey.
Right.
Now, this didn't go so far, but it was always in the drawers. Now, and the EU came to its simple conclusion, maybe the drawing power, maybe the attractiveness of our concept of enlargement and telling countries what to do was never really discussed with the people on the street, the trade unions, the employers, everyone, perhaps not even with politicians. So maybe not the EU came to the end of a continuous enlargement from the Atlantic to Kiev, perhaps the people who are now members, and many people, I saw an enquete, a survey only the other day in Serbia, repeated from 2018, and it said that probably a majority of citizens would not be extremely open to joining the EU if it needs too many compromises,
right,
if it has to change the way of life for Serbia. Interesting points. So I think it's not only the EU coming to perhaps its absorption capacity, perhaps the EU should start to listen to the peoples in those countries concerned.
Certainly never a boring day in the Balkans, and these days in particular, as we see America getting back into the game, China certainly exerting its influence, and the EU trying to gain lost ground with Russia never far away. Darko, Victor, and Klaus, thank you so much for your insights. And thank you out there, of course, for watching. I hope to see you again next time when we are back with a new edition of Newsmakers.